Hong Kong activists say their freedoms are being eroded. However, Beijing says the law is necessary for the city to prosper, and that many countries welcome this. On behalf of 53 countries, Cuba welcomed the law of the People's Republic of China on safeguarding national security in Hong Kong at the session of the United Nations Human Rights Council. They believe that the law will help the sustained and steady implementation of one country, two systems. A principle within which a high degree of autonomy was supposed to be guaranteed in Hong Kong for at least 50 years when Britain handed back its former colony to China in 1997. The new law is a flagrant breach of the agreement, says the city's last UK governor.
And I think it's very important that we stand up together, not starting a new Cold War with China, but just making absolutely clear that we will call out China when it behaves badly.
The UK now says it would uphold its historic duty and offer a route for up to 3 million residents to settle in the country. That could make citizenship possible. Across the Atlantic, the US has punitively revoked Hong Kong's special financial and business status. Washington says it's not only concerned about the safety of Hong Kongers, but also that of Americans.
Article 38 of the new law also purports to apply to offenses committed outside of Hong Kong by non-residents of Hong Kong, and this likely includes Americans. This is outrageous and an affront to all nations.
The EU, meanwhile, has said it's discussing with international partners possible measures in response. German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas has called developments in Hong Kong exceptionally worrying. These protesters are worried too, but they've pledged to try as hard as they can to keep their voices heard.
And let's get more on that. We are joined now by Phoebe Kong, who is joining us from Hong Kong. Phoebe, we just heard about this offer of a path to citizenship from the UK for Hong Kong residents. What's been the reaction, and are people likely to take them up on that?
Well, actually, there has been a growing trend and aspiration of emigration in Hong Kong over the past few years, followed by a series of political unrest and encroachment. So the new lifeboat schemes from the UK will simply offer another incentive for for the people who want to move away from Hong Kong, especially those middle class, more educated and professionals and families with young children. So they are the people want to move overseas, to persist the way of life, the original way of life Hong Kong in the past. But on the other hand, as we observe the move in Hong Kong, quite a lot of young people, especially those who were born after 1997, who don't have any colonial passport, quite a number of them, they want to stay here for their fight. So we see there's a polarized sentiment here in Hong Kong, but definitely the new citizenship scheme from UK would be another option for Hong Kong people, and more people are now applying to renew the British National Overseas Passport as an exit for them.
And the polarization, the resistance visible on the streets yesterday, we know hundreds of people were arrested. What is likely to happen today?
Well, things have been cooled down a little bit after the anniversary rally yesterday, and this is what we expected for the coming few days. After the massive and the iconic protest, the street protests will cool down a little bit. And another reason is that it's simply too risky for people to take to the street right now. Yesterday, 10 people were arrested for the charge of the national security offenses. So almost all of them, they were just possessing and holding pro-independence slogans or other anti-government slogans. So today we saw similar actions are now going on. So I think the street protest is getting more risky, and people will step back a bit, and the social and political activism may transform in another way to proceed in the future.
Correspondent Phoebe Kong in Hong Kong, thank you. And DW correspondent Georg Mattis is following the story for us. He has the reaction from Brussels. Georg, we've been seeing this international reaction to the new national security law in Hong Kong. It's been mixed. Where does Brussels stand?
Sarah, not a lot of pressure coming from Brussels. In a way, you rather have the expected statements. You had Joseph Borrell, the foreign policy chief, saying that it was essential that existing rights remain observed in Hong Kong. You had Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, adding that national security law does not conform with Hong Kong basic law and that they are seriously concerned about it. And seriously concerned about it says it all. There's no implications of sanctions. Foreign ministers debated that in their last meeting in May, and they came to the conclusion that it was not applicable because it would not solve the problem.
Why is the EU not doing more?
A number of reasons really here. When it comes to foreign policy, this is not the sharpest tool of the EU. Foreign policy falls within the individual member states, the sovereignty of those 27 member states, and their various interests, big economic interests, of course, including Germany. Then, of course, you have Brexit, and the EU has lost, I would say, one of its most committed members when it comes to the question of Hong Kong, which is the UK. And then finally, you have the corona crisis. And here, really, you have a situation where the EU currently is trying to put together a rescue fund. And the last thing they need, or the last thing the German presidency, which started yesterday, wants to see is a row, an economic row over sanctions with China.
So it's all about the money. Meantime, how is Europe viewing the latest move in terms of human rights and basic fundamental freedoms?
Of course, human rights is a particular field that has been, of course, addressed by EU officials. A 27-country declaration urges China to avoid undermining Hong Kong's autonomy and particularly emphasizes civil and political rights. And that is also the argument that the US, for instance, has put forward, although they are much closer to sanctions than the EU. Now, the difference being, many observers have said, is simply that the US is almost on the edge of a trade war, if not a cold war, with China, and the EU is trying to avoid exactly that being drawn into that conflict.
Georg Mattis in Brussels, thank you. Well, Hong Kong is one of the world's financial hubs, of course, even as mainland markets like Shenzhen and Shanghai have grown rich. Hong Kong is still seen as the gateway to financial markets in China and the rest of Asia. But that, too, is now under threat.
Over the past few decades, two trends have shaped the fortunes of Hong Kong. One is the rise in Chinese wealth. The other, the boom in global finance. When these two currents converged, Hong Kong grew rich. But months of unrest driven by pro-democracy protests and now the introduction of a new security law have raised fears that could all change. Among the concerns, that capital will leave as China tightens its grip, that talent will go, and that enterprise itself will leave. Polls have suggested that some international firms would consider moving regional offices depending on the implementation of the law. So far, there's been little evidence to support those fears. More capital has entered Hong Kong in recent months than has left it, thanks to China's deep pockets. Local businesses have, by and large, given their blessing to the new law. And even larger firms like Britain's HSBC appear ready to accept it. Adding to the wind in Hong Kong sales, more Chinese companies are likely to list on the city's exchange, as new US rules make Chinese IPOs there more difficult.
Let's bring in business correspondent Clifford Coonan, who's joining us here in the studio. How much longer can Hong Kong remain a financial hub?
Well, this is the big question. I mean, this is the law here, and I've been going through it over the last day or so and talking to analysts. And what they're saying is generally that they feel that there is a real danger that Hong Kong could become just like another Chinese city, that this law will be quite good for domestic listings and for companies that have a big interest in China. But the international dimension is under threat, and I think that's where we're really looking at. In 10 years, we're not going to see pictures like we've seen pictures of protests, and I can't really see that happening in 10 years' time. So there's a lot of fear around the moment, a lot of uncertainty.
Where will the money go? Where will the people go?
Well, we've seen that some will maybe go to Britain. Australia has also said that it's going to take some people. Capital at the moment, the question that people are saying, if I need to have my money, why would I have it in Hong Kong when there's now uncertainty, when the heavy hand of China is in evidence, when I could put it in places like Singapore? And also Taiwan. Taiwan is emerging again as a place where a lot of people will be looking, and I think we're going to see a lot of growth there too.
What are you making of the international reaction?
It's been very interesting. I mean, the US was very quick to move. The EU, as we've just heard, has been quick to condemn, but hasn't really done anything yet. I think for a long time, people have been enjoying the economic growth that we've seen in China, and they wanted a piece of that. But what we haven't really seen is people realizing that that comes at a certain cost. And one of those costs is the notion of freedom and democracy in Hong Kong. So increasingly, you're going to see people having to weigh up these things. And when you look at some analysts were saying yesterday that maybe people are going to start looking at the Hong Kong question and asking, is it going to be like investing in tobacco in the 70s? Is suddenly investing in China going to come at a cost? China's becoming incredibly aggressive in the last few months. It's under cover of COVID. It's introduced various measures. So possibly I think that we could see real changes in that way and a different way of thinking about how investing in China happens, largely driven by the Hong Kong situation.
So the name of the game going forward, uncertainty. Clifford Coonan from GW Business, thank you.